years.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years.
As the oldest registered religious lobby in Washington, D.C., FCNL has faithfully lobbied Congress and numerous presidential administrations for 80 years. FCNL is composed of the Friends Committee on National Legislation, the FCNL Education Fund, and Friends Place on Capitol Hill. Together, these three Quaker, nonprofit, and nonpartisan groups form one of the most effective change agents in Washington, working to advance peace, justice, and environmental stewardship through lobbying, education, civic engagement, and hospitality.
So being brave and constant to me is part of being a Quaker lobby on Capitol Hill. We need to be brave enough to change. And if there is anything that's constant about Quakerism, it's our leading to be open to continuing revelation. And that means being courageous enough to know that we need to continue changing and evolving and responding to the needs that the world has.
All right. Hello, everyone. We are so delighted to just have such a wonderful turnout today while we celebrate our 80th anniversary. The clip you just saw, yes, yay. The clip you just saw is one of 3 sneak peeks of a new video we are producing called Celebrating FCNL at 80. When our founders met in Richmond, Indiana amid World War II in June of 1943, they might not have anticipated that FCNL would last 80 years and that we're looking forward to the next 80. But your prayers, your advocacy, your financial support, and all those who have joined the great cloud of witnesses have sustained us throughout our history, and we thank you. Our celebration today will be in 3 segments, each part starting with a short video like the one you just saw. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we will answer them at the end of the segment. So joining us today to discuss FCNL's past, present, and future are 2 of our former Secretaries General, Joe Volk and Diane Randall, and our current leader, Bridget Moix. Welcome. I'm Kristen Archer. Hey, Joe. And I'm Kristen Archer, co-producer of the 80th anniversary video and FCNL's social media and editorial director. So without further ado, let's kick off our celebration. We're gonna get started with this query. What has sustained FCNL in the last 80 years and what do you think has kept us going?
So I'll jump in first. And first, I would just want to say thank you to everyone who's here. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Diane, for being here, for all your leadership, all your mentorship for me. And what a wonderful group. I was watching people come in and join and thinking, wow, it's like a big family reunion. So many friends and mentors here for us together. So thanks to everyone for being here and being part of FCNL. What sustains FCNL? Kristen, I was thinking about the 1943 founding when you started the conversation. And when I arrived here at FCNL as General Secretary, Diane had left a stack of papers on the desk for me. And right on top was the founding documents of FCNL. And thinking back to 1943, the middle of World War II, the incredible courage and vision and faith that it took for this small group of friends in the middle of the country, in the Midwest, to come together and say, we have something to do in Washington, D.C. We have a Quaker voice. We have a voice for peace that is needed in the political arena that Congress needs to hear. And we need to connect people to that change work with policymaking. That's remarkable. And I think what has sustained FCNL over these 80 years is that deep grounding in our Quaker faith and the expression of it as a witness in the world that is both prophetic for that world we seek and also very pragmatic. What can we do today? We don't expect to change the whole world right now, but we have a clear vision and we're grounded in the faith that we can work pragmatically each day towards that. So I think that that deep grounding in our history and all those who've come before us and our Quaker faith certainly sustains us. And the other thing that I was thinking about in terms of sustaining us into the future really is right here present in this call. It is the network of incredible advocates all around this country who are part of FCNL and are doing that change work with us. We always say we don't accomplish anything in Washington alone. I think that was a lesson Joe taught me early on. We're always working in community and in coalition. And the incredible network that's grown over the last decades to now have 135 advocacy teams in 47 states, so many people, friends and others, fellow travelers engaged with us. That certainly is what sustains me. Going around the country and getting to meet with some of you is such a gift. And it's what keeps me going here in Washington for sure. But I'd love to hear Joe and Diane's reflections on this question.
Well, I'll jump in and say first, again, thank you to everybody. But I particularly want to say thank you to the General Committee and to all the people who made it possible for me to enjoy this wonderful job in Washington, D.C., working with this wonderful community of FCNL. And in terms of what sustains it, I'll say something about that in a minute. But first, I want to say, read this book. Witness in Washington. It was published in 1994, and it's a wonderful history of the first 50 years of FCNL. And in that book, Tom Mullen, the editor, Ed Snyder, one of the authors, Wilmer Cooper, one of the authors, they really pull a tremendous amount of information together in a very readable, accessible way. So give this book, Witness in Washington, a try. One of the things I want to say about what sustains is I think that the Friends community has shared with so many people within the community and beyond, as Bridget was describing, a practice of living in a world which is now but not yet. That there is a kind of faithful courage to do the things that love calls us to do, even when that is the last thing people in the broader community want you to do. And when they're even calling you away from that. And I think one of the sustaining things has been that faithful practice of Friends, which FCNL was able to help to amplify in the nation's capital and now in congressional districts across the US.
Thank you, Joe. Diane, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this event tonight. It's really great, as Bridget said, to see so many familiar faces and friends on this call. It really reminds me of those Thursdays with Friends that we started doing during the pandemic and had so many great conversations. So thanks to the communication staff there at FCNL, to Bridget and to Joe for this event. I guess I would just amplify. I love what Bridget said at the beginning of the video that we saw, that FCNL is open to change. So as an organization, I think that's really an important feature of this particular organization, is that the mission is clear, the vision is clear, the we seeks are fundamental to everything that FCNL does. That fulsome policy statement, bolstered by the priorities process, those are so essential to how the organization functions. And then I would say that, I think the people who are part of FCNL are truly remarkable. And by that, I agree with Joe, the general committee, and all the network of volunteers who are part of advocacy teams and part of the work that we do. And just to underline the work of the staff, I mean, there's, sometimes I'll go back and see photos of people who've worked at FCNL and are no longer there, or I'll see people who were there, they've gone on to some other kind of position. And it's so exciting to see the breadth of talent that FCNL has had through the staff, but also through the network of volunteers. We are really a blessed organization. And then I would, again, just echo something I think Joe really helped me think about as I came into work at FCNL in 2011, and I know has been part of the work going forward, is the quality and the practice of hope, of keeping our focus on what might be possible. So Joe mentioned to do what love could do, and I agree with that. Bridget talked about faith, and I would say also that hope is fundamental to how FCNL functions. So faith, hope, and love are all part of this organization's fundamental core as we operate in the world.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much, Diane. So just a reminder to all of our fellow celebrants, please feel free to add any questions you might have to the chat, and we would be happy to go through them and ask our guests here today. Or memories, like Wesley said, any good memories from your time at FCNL or FCNL's history, it would be great to share. But I think we are going to go ahead and move along. Wesley, are we ready to move on to our second segment? Okay. All right, we're going to get started with that in just a couple of minutes.
Hey, Kristen, can I jump in and just say that along with those volunteers and staff, that I just want to give a shout out to all the people who have financially supported FCNL through the years too. I know that there's a countdown and we're going to hear a little bit more about that to get to the end of the fiscal year. But I found real joy in talking to people who, had been part of the financial support of the organization as well, because it is essential and it really has allowed the organization to flourish in lots of ways. So I don't want to lose that thread as an important one. And then just to underscore also the support that we've found in congressional offices, there's a great team of lobbyists there that have built those, but again, shout out to the staff who cultivated those individual relationships with their own members. Those have made a difference. And there are people on this call, I know, who could tell stories of how they were able to move a member of Congress just a little bit by their own advocacy. So that's always been really critical.
Thank you, Diane. So Joe, it actually looks like we do have a question in the chat for you from Susan Penn. Susan writes, Joe, you went with an interfaith mission on a listening project to Iran in the mid-1990s to bring back to Memphis and to the country the message of war is not the answer. How do you think about that experience today?
Oh, thank you for that question. That's a really good question. And actually, I think about that frequently. And one of the things that Bridget mentioned was the strength that is built by the cooperation of a number of organizations. And that delegation to Iran in 2007, I believe it was made possible by cooperation between FCNL, the American Friends Service Committee, and the Mennonite Central Committee. And the Mennonite Central Committee had been doing earthquake relief for 19 years previous to that time. And the on-the-ground earthquake relief work that they had done had put them in touch with local government and community and religious leaders and national religious leaders. And so when we made that trip to Iran for the purpose of trying to demonstrate to the Bush administration that a peaceful diplomacy was possible, you could have a conversation. Guess what happened? And also stop me if I run on too long. Guess what happened? Before we left, the State Department told us, do not go. You shouldn't be talking with these people. And we had said, we want your assurance that if we invite a delegation to come from Iran back, we need to know now before we go. They said, no, don't go, and you shouldn't go. We went, we talked with the president, we talked with ministers in the government, we talked with religious leaders, and we didn't invite the delegation. When we came back, one of the places we went back to tell about our trip was the State Department. And one of the first things they said was, when is the delegation coming? And we said, we didn't make an invitation because you told us you wouldn't give them visas. And they said, well, while you were away, we thought about this and we changed our mind. Send 2 people back to the Iran and do the invitations. And so we weren't the only ones doing this sort of thing, but we were among them, and it had a remarkable effect. It was a wonderful trip, and I wish I could say more about it, but I know we got to move on.
Thank you so much for that, Joe. So we have a couple more questions in the chat, but if you all don't mind, we're going to hang on to those for the next 2 segments because I think they'll actually fit well with where we're headed. So we are going to go ahead and get started with our second sneak peek.
Established by Quakers in Richmond, Indiana in 1943, FCNL began lobbying against military conscription and for aid to Europe during World War II. Since the beginning, our legislative policy has been rooted in the belief that there is that of God in every person. From defeating mandatory military training to helping to thaw relations with China, FCNL's first 30 years were marked by efforts to stop violent conflict around the world and address root causes by changing public policy through legislation.
It's fair to say that what attracted me the most to Quakerism is a peace testimony. You can apply this knowledge to civilian purposes, to peaceful purposes. And that's possible.
FCNL has remained steadfast in its commitment to a more peaceful and just world, from promoting laws that provided relief to Europe during and after World War II, and playing a significant role in the creation of the Peace Corps in 1961, to preventing future wars. In the 70s, Ed Snyder led efforts to cancel the appropriations of $474 million to the South Vietnamese military, expediting an end to the U.S. war in Vietnam. And in the 80s, FCNL helped thaw relations with the Soviet Union and built congressional support for a series of international treaties to reduce the number of nuclear weapons and lessen the threat of war. In the 1990s, FCNL helped to ratify the UN Convention on Chemical Weapons and then advocated for the United States to adopt a code of conduct on arms transfers. However, no one knew then how much the 9/11 terrorist attacks would catalyze a pivotal shift in U.S. foreign policy and mark an important point in FCNL history.
Right away, the staff went to work on, what is this going to mean? What's the United States going to do? And what can we say about this now? We had paper all over the walls of our conference room, and we had written down probably 100 or more suggestions. What was it we could say? And the one we kept coming back to was one that said, war is not the answer.
Great. So as you saw, that segment succeeded in compressing more than 60 years of history into 3 minutes. And it brought up a lot of milestones in FCNL's history, like the creation of the Peace Corps, ending the Vietnam War, nuclear non-proliferation treaties, say that 4 times fast, civil rights, and 9/11. And as some of you may know, this year also marks the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. So Joe, could you talk a little bit about what role FCNL and other Quaker organizations played in ending the war?
Yes, I'd like to do that. As many people know, I was very much shaped by the U.S. war in Vietnam because I refused my deferments. I went into the Army knowing I could get in a whole lot of trouble, and I did my best to do that, to try to organize and educate soldiers why they should refuse to go to Vietnam. And in that situation, I wasn't even really thinking so much about Congress and Washington, D.C., and thank goodness FCNL was there to be doing that. But let me talk first about other Quaker organizations and what they did. They answered to that of God in me. And when my own denomination, my pastor, told me I was doing the wrong thing and I should serve my country by going to Vietnam and fighting, and I said I wouldn't, he wrote down in kind of an angry way a name and an address, and he said, well, go see these people, they can probably help you. And I had no idea who they were talking about, who he was talking about. And I went to the American Friends Service Committee storefront military counseling in Denver, Colorado. And there, Chester McQuarrie and Holmes Brown answered to me, to that of God in me, and they helped me and supported me in this difficult time. And of course, there were a lot of friends supporting AFSC to do that sort of thing. Little did I know that at the same time, there was an organization called Friends Committee on National Legislation that was actively at work. David Hartsaw was working at FCNL at the time when I was in the Army and in the stockade. Ed Snyder, as was already mentioned, and a host of other people working diligently to overcome this military industrial complex effort to keep the war going as long as they could. And in the work that they were doing, they were helping to save lives, Vietnamese lives, helping to save lives of Americans. It's too bad it couldn't have been done faster, but wow, what an effort to stand up and do what is so often and easily remarked today, speaking truth to power. Let me tell you, that wasn't easy. Speaking truth to power in those times was hard, and it took courage to do it, and they did it every day.
Thank you, Joe. So the excerpt that we just saw ended with 9/11, and the aftermath of 9/11 connected all three of your time with FCNL. So Joe, can you talk a little bit about the two slogans that came out of that time? And then we'll move on to Bridget and Diane sort of helping to connect the dots.
Well, as the little clip mentioned, the slogan that we came up with, what are we going to say? What is the prophetic thing we can say that we can put on the front of our building, facing the Hart Senate office building, was war is not the answer. And why did we choose that? As I said, it kept coming up in all the different choices we had looked at. And we wanted also that statement to prompt a question. Well, FCNL, if war isn't the answer, what the hell is? What is it that you think we ought to be doing? And we could then talk about, we think we should be working on peaceful prevention of deadly conflict, on international development, on right sharing of world resources, and on diplomacy as a alternative to endless war. And that had an impact. And I'll just mention one thing. When we put that sign up on the wall, outside wall of FCNL facing the Hart Senate office building, people walking by stopped and their eyes just opened up like, whoa. And we're talking about Supreme Court clerks, Senate staff, House staff, colleague organizations. And I remember one colleague organization from a major denomination coming over to me and holding my hand and whispering into my ear, oh, this is a precious moment. And I only wish my denomination had the courage to say this too. So I think FCNL was showing the way, and we could do it because it was right with our principles, but also we could do it because our donors, our governors wanted us to do that, and they would back us, and it made all the difference.
Great. Thank you, Joe. So Bridget, around that same time, you made your journey back to FCNL. So can you talk a bit about what prompted you to come back?
Sure. Well, Joe prompted me as one of the answers, but at that time, some folks on this call know I was an intern right out of college with FCNL, part of FCNL's young adult program, which is still going strong. And I had 2 great years of learning how to lobby, learning about U.S. foreign policy, learning from Joe about Quakerism and how do you work on Capitol Hill as a Quaker lobby. But I really thought, wow, I want to go see the problems of the world from a bigger perspective. And so in 2001, I was in New York. I had done grad school, and I was actually working with the Quaker United Nations office. And I was loving it. I loved looking at the problems of the world from the perspective of almost 200 different countries and trying to grapple with all of the different ways different countries in the world would try to address a problem. So in 2001, in the fall of 2001, I was not thinking about coming back to Washington to work on US policy. But when 9/11 happened and we were there at the Quaker UN office, we saw the UN evacuating. We went to Quaker House, and I was just actually reliving this with Lori Henninger, who was one of the co-directors at the time. CUNO, the Quaker UN office, just celebrated its 75th anniversary in New York a couple weekends ago. And we were talking about this and about the response and how would friends respond to this global crisis, but really a crisis also in the US and in what would become US foreign policy from that moment on, as the video clip talks about. And so I thought, wow, this is going to get bad. Joe sent me a note and said, FCNL's ramping up more work. We have another foreign policy position open, lobbyist position open. Would you be interested in applying? And I thought, well, I don't think I really want to go back to Washington. It's hard to work in Washington. But I felt that call that many of all of you on this call feel to be engaged with changing US policy for the better. And so I remember coming back for the interview, and I got here a little bit early and thought, well, I'll take a walk around the Capitol before I go to the interview. And I started walking from Union Station up towards the Capitol, and I literally ran into a physical wall around the Capitol. So after 9/11, of course, all this security went up around the Capitol. But the symbolism of that just hit me right in the face. And I thought, this is it. This is a wall between the people and the people's house. And this is going to not only be really bad for how the US responds in the world, foreign policy, but this is going to really denigrate our democracy. And we did see a lot of that happening. And so I still think back on that moment of confronting that wall and realizing, as a US citizen, as someone who feels called to try to build the world we seek and responsible for playing a role, I needed to be in Washington. And luckily I got the job. So I came back as a lobbyist. And as Joe said, we were really challenged at that time, not only responding to US war in Afghanistan and then trying to prevent the US war in Iraq, but also trying to answer the question, if war is not the answer, what is? And to give Congress practical policy solutions that did not rely on a militarized foreign policy and did not further militarize our domestic policy as well and undermine civic rights in the US. So we're working on peaceful prevention of deadly conflict. And looking back now at that work, Joe may remember, we would go into these lobby visits to try to talk to members of Congress about preventing war instead of fighting it. And they would just look at us like deer in the headlight, like they couldn't understand what we were even talking about. It was like banging your head against a wall. We had no legislation we could hook onto. We were, it was all about trying to cut military budget. We were trying to figure out, how do we get Congress to invest in peace? Very, very difficult at the beginning. And looking back now, 20 plus years later, FCNL was a big part of, with many others, but was a big part of helping create new funding for civilian-led crisis response, for prevention of atrocities and violence around the world. And now we and our network are campaigning to increase the funding for that civilian-led peace building in the US budget. So you see the change. It takes a long time sometimes, but you see that practical work tied to that longer prophetic vision it can make a real difference.
Thank you, Bridget. Now, Diane, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball because we have a couple of good questions in the chat. And I want to make sure that we get to all of them. But I feel like this one is kind of up your alley. So this question is from Freya DeCola of Reston, Virginia. Freya says, can you say something about the importance of champions in Congress? I always take hope from the example of people like Representative Barbara Lee and her many years of working on issues that had little support. So I offer that to you because I know, Diane, you were here during that sort of pivot. You joined us in 2011, and we went from trying to prevent the post 9/11 wars to trying to end them. So can you talk a little bit about that and answer Freya's question?
Well, sure. And I completely, as soon as I thought about champions in Congress, I think of Barbara Lee, both because of her sole vote in voting against the 2001 authorization for the use of military force for the invasion of Afghanistan and then against the invasion in Iraq. And I'll just say that, when I got to FCNL, basically, I got there in 2011, but by 2012, we were still promoting war is not the answer. And the fascinating thing, and I guess encouraging, but still tragic part is that, we saw 10 years after the invasion of Iraq, we saw journalists and, writing against what folly it had been for the US to invade Iraq. We saw people, members of Congress who had voted for it, change their minds. And I think the public recognized that it was a misbegotten war, and war was not the answer there. And I think it continues to be a very powerful statement. So I just want to affirm that work that started and the prescience that FCNL had and continues to have in addressing the violence of war and the fallout of war. I think of champions, though, and I think one of the ways that FCNL operates is that we see that, there may be a champion who agrees with us on 50% of the priorities that FCNL has, but may not agree with us on everything. And so I think that's the other way to think about how we find champions and work with them. So, I think of Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, who has been an ongoing champion for repealing the authorization for the use of military force, as being a really strong proponent. But I also think of someone like Representative Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, who I think really began to understand the notion of making those investments in preventing war through some of those peace building accounts. And so, that's the work of doing this work on Capitol Hill and the investment made in the staff and the volunteer lobbyists is that we can, FCNL can really help cultivate those champions on specific issues and then work to, maintain the connection to them. And that's really important. There are people, I'll just go back to Barbara Lee for a minute, because Barbara Lee, one of the great things about working with her and her office is not only was she a great and has been a great champion on this question of peace and ending the authorization for the use of repealing the authorization for the use of military force, but she's been a real champion on many domestic issues, and certainly on issues like criminal justice reform, some of the initiatives that we've undertaken on that, and also on many of the social services and economic justice issues. And so I think that, again, I come back to this notion of how the FCNL advocacy teams build relationships. And it is an opportunity really to, even though the advocacy teams choose a single issue to work on for a year and really go deep on those issues, which I think has a power, the relationship extends beyond that specific issue. And so that's a very powerful way to lobby and one of FCNL's true strengths.
Can I just jump in, because I want to underline what Diane just said, and particularly Barbara Lee, that relationship, going back to with Joe and FCNL, with her first vote against the war in Afghanistan, the only vote, the ministry that FCNL provided to her, I think, and then Diane, your long working relationship with her and the AUMF work. When I joined, we set up a visit with Barbara Lee. Of course, I was thrilled to go meet with her. Thought she would give me about 10 minutes because obviously the woman is very busy and has a lot of important work to do. She sat with me for an hour, and she talked about FCNL's relationship with her. I asked her lots of questions and advice. She talked about our community of advocates around the country. So those relationships and that support for champions in Congress that FCNL offers over the years, it really is very important.
Thank you. Yes, Joe.
Kristen, when you first opened this and asked me a question, you asked me about two things we said. I do want to make sure that we're going to get to that second prophetic statement, which Diane and her staff are so responsible for doing it. And thank you for doing that. Love thy neighbor, no exceptions. And that was the right prophetic statement at the right time. And it continues to be as relevant today as it was when it was started. I'm sorry to say that, but we have a lot of work to do there. And Diane and her team led us to that statement.
Thank you, Joe. So real quick from the chat, I have a memory to share from Lynn Erkstein. Lynn says, great to see familiar faces. A memory, staff gathering at the meeting room at FCNL as the Gulf War began, January 1991. We were so sad, but held each other up in that moment. An elder spoke about the Vietnam War and the need for tenacity. Thank you, Joe, for leading that peace work, and also later in 2003. And then I just also would like to give a special shout out to David Hartzell. He's here. We're excited to have you here, David. And David said to Bridget, great to see you and be part of this wonderful 80th anniversary celebration. I helped organize the 20th anniversary celebration. How about that?
Wonderful.
That's awesome.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you, David. Thank you. Okay. All right. I think we do have a couple more questions, but I think we're gonna keep moving, and then we'll get back to a couple questions from the chat.
Great. Are we going to show the next video?
Yes.
Awesome. I got it queued up. Give me a quick second. I was busy spotlighting all the great people in the call. So many great faces. Thank you for being here. Here we go.
Well, repealing the authorization for the use of military force clearly was central to the work that FCNL has done. And working with Congressman Barbara Lee, who was the one lone vote against the authorization of the use of military force, was really rewarding.
We think what we're going through right now is bad. It is, but it has been bad in other times too. But we keep going and we keep making positive change.
The work that we do with Native Americans, to me, is reflective of excellent solidarity and allyship in the ways that our A Jedi statement calls us to.
When we talk about seeking an earth restored, working on climate is really at the heart of what drives, I think, Quaker values. It's at the heart of seeking justice, whether it's economic justice, social justice, or environmental justice.
We are undoing centuries of oppression. So it's not something that can be done overnight, but there are always signs of progress.
As of now, we've welcomed 619 migrants into our space in that first year since busing began, and that has been really a wonderful way for us to show that we mean it when we say we love our neighbors.
I think that one of the main things that FCNL offers is personal transformation through democratic participation, and I have lived that experience.
Making it feel possible for people, especially now that many members are doing virtual visits as well. That has made lobbying much more accessible to more people, and I think FCNL really helps people feel that they can do this.
Our young adult program constantly proves that we are working with leaders that are making change right now with the skills they have right now and the experiences that they have.
We are becoming a more diverse and inclusive community. We're becoming that beloved community that we try to seek in the world and try to build in the world. And that helps us become more Quaker. It helps us live our Quaker values and become the community that we want to be.
Great, thank you, Wesley. So as you can see, it's been quite an evolution at FCNL. So, you know, over that time, I'm sure the three of you have countless stories and have also, you know, gone through some transformative experiences yourself. So Diane and Bridget, can you share a bit about the expansion of our domestic program and our strategic advocacy?
Sure, I'll start, and then Bridget can add on, because it's really, even in the year and a half since I've been gone and Bridget's taken on leadership at FCNL, there have been some really exciting changes, I think. So, but I want to make sure that I say this before we forget. I just want to give a shout out to E. Raymond Wilson, who was the first executive secretary of FCNL, and then to Ed Snyder. And of course, Raymond and Ed have both passed. And so that's why you get Joe and me, because we're still hanging on here. But I think that they really were people who had a vision that has helped carry this organization. And so I know that we've had the blessing of being in touch with their family and their connectors as well. And so just need to name that. When I came to FCNL, you know, there was a fantastic staff there. You know, my colleagues, Jem Kaysen and Arthur Meyer Boyd and Ruth Flower really were instrumental in helping me learn the organization. And I just name Ruth as the person who was carrying so much of the legislative program at that time. Ruth's heart really was in economic justice, and she carried that portfolio. But embedded in that, really in Ruth's work at the time, was the Native American advocacy work and the criminal justice reform work, and basically anything we were doing on the domestic side. And so our ability to grow the economic justice portfolio allowed us to add, you know, someone full-time to work on immigration and refugees, someone full-time to work on criminal justice and gun violence prevention, and bolster the Native American advocacy program, you know, through full-time work and attention to this. And great to see Lauren, who I think was sitting outside of Friends Center on Capitol Hill in that video, where she talked about the allyship that's created with the Native American community. And I think one of the that I remember being in a room full of faith advocates, and of course, you know, both Joe and Bridget have named these as some of the allies we work with and FCNL works with. And, you know, as we went around and talked about what various faith communities were doing, most of them said, we just defer to FCNL. You know, FCNL takes the lead on this, and, you know, we'll add our voices. But I think that is really important for people around the country to know that it's been I think a very important voice from the faith-based community, and one that continues to evolve and change. And so I think I just want to recognize that. And then I'll just comment on Joe's Love Thy Neighbor, No Exceptions. One of the fun things about having that building right on Capitol Hill across from the Senate office building is, as Joe noted, it's really a billboard in a sense. I can put up, you know, various banners on it. And I know the Love No Exceptions and the Rainbow Pride is up now, but I remember when we were getting ready to put that up, and shout out to comm staff and to Emily, I think, who really developed that Love Thy Neighbor, No Exceptions. When they were talking about it, Jem Kaysen said to me, yeah, we're thinking about putting this up because there's so much acrimony in Congress. And, you know, this is a core message of FCNL, to love thy neighbor. You know, this is biblically based, and, you know, it's something that we want to live with. And he said, so we're thinking of, like, love thy neighbor, that means you, Congress. And I said, I don't think we can go with that message right there. But, you know, and so they played around with it a little bit. And it really has been a message that is central not just to FCNL, but to who we are as friends. And we see that message on friends meetings around the country, and one that we see also other people use. And I think that both war is not the answer and love thy neighbor, no exceptions. I've seen people use it who have no idea where those slogans, so to speak, come from, but they have meaning for people. And that's one of the benefits that I think joys of FCNL's work is that it is work that is often shared by others, that we know that you don't have to be Quaker to work with FCNL. We talk about people being Quaker adjacent, but it's a real benefit to be able to have the basis of what we do, be allied with and part of the Quaker community, but also to extend far beyond.
Thank you, Diane. Bridget, anything to add to that?
Sure. Well, I'll just add on more of that evolution and change that's been happening since I just started, as Diane said, January 2022. I started at the end of the month, and we were still in the midst sort of the pandemic. The pandemic was not over. The great, reckoning in the US around racism and racial justice, we were still in the midst of that, still are. And so when I came into FCNL, there was a lot of work being done around how do we live in this time now, and what is our role, and how do we both work for that beloved community through the policy change work, and how do we make sure that we're living that becoming of the beloved community in the organization and within the community of friends. So we have continued to try to evolve the organization to live into that mission. Lauren Brownlee was mentioned. She's in the video, and she's now serving as our Associate General Secretary for Community and Culture, which is a new part of the organization to try to really embed that work of becoming an anti-racist, anti-bias, justice, inclusive, diverse community into the organizational structure and into all that we do, and giving it a home and leadership within the organization. And that work is going to be ongoing, and it relates to that allyship that Diane mentioned, which is historic with the Native American program. And there are specific legislative things we can do, like the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding Schools, where we continue to reckon with our own community's role, the role of Quakers in that, and to push for the change externally in the world and internally within our own community. So that work is continuing to evolve and will be a really important part of all that we do. And the other thing I'll just mention is, and there have been a couple questions in the chat box about Ukraine and FCNL's role in advancing a world free of war and the threat of war. And what does that mean now in the context that we're in, where big power conflicts between the US and Russia, between US and China, are again emerging and threatening the nuclear escalation. So when I came to the job, it was only 1 month before the Russian invasion of Ukraine started. And we put the sign back on our building, war is not the answer, because we felt like that message is still so true, just as the love thy neighbor message is so true with our A Jedi work and all that we do. And part of the Ukraine work is about one of the lessons from Joe about our peace testimony. It's not a doctrine. Our testimonies are living testimonies, and we get tested every time. We get tested again and again. So it's not a simple answer that we offer to the world. It is a seeking, and it is a seeking and pursuit of peace, even in the midst of war and difficult, complicated violence and conflict. And so FCNL has been advocating for diplomacy and a way out of the war that de-escalates the violence and seeks a diplomatic, negotiated solution. And we were saying that very early on, and now many more people are starting to say it too, because the option, there's not a lot of options for where this conflict goes. So we are continuing that historic work of building a more peaceful and just community and world, and trying to evolve it as the world evolves.
Thank you, Bridget. Real quick, I just wanted to read a message in the chat from John Doty. Greetings from Capitol Hill. I'm participating from my office in Rayburn. Great to hear Quaker voices here. I've used FCNL materials for nearly every tricky foreign affairs decision over the past 29 years since I left FCNL as an intern in 1994. Joe, the videos remind me of the videos we made for the Arms Transfers Working Group, but that video had much higher production values. Good to see you, John.
Hi, John. Great to hear from you and to see you. Wonderful.
Great. Okay, well, we're going to just keep on going here because we have a lot of questions, but before we get into those, just want to get, some rapid fire answers from our three guests here. So amid all these changes and this evolution, what gives you hope for the future of FCNL? Whether it's in a short word or phrase. You can go to Joe first.
Well, the persistence, no matter what kind of problems FCNL has had, and we've had some really difficult ones, the committee has got us through it. And that's why we were the first green office building on Capitol Hill at a time when everybody said that couldn't happen. You couldn't do it. And the committee made it happen.
I'll go next. I want to say it's the young adults who've been part of FCNL and continue to be part of FCNL. I was thrilled that we could actually grow that program and not just the interns and program assistants, but also through creating the advocacy corps and a more established summer intern program and really growing Spring Lobby Weekend, which has continued. And I'll just note that, there are at least I think 5 different former program assistants who've had either given voice or had an impact in this call: Bridget Moix, John Doty, Matt Southworth, Susan Navi, who's on staff, and forgive me for getting other people, but it's really encouraging to see people. I am waiting to see the first member of Congress who was a former FCNL program assistant elected, and I believe it will happen in my lifetime.
Yes, it will.
So I will give a shout out to the Young Adult Program as one of the alum and add that Friends Place on Capitol Hill, the newest part of FCNL, is this incredible opportunity that gives me a lot of hope for engaging many people and many, many more young people. And the other thing that gives me a lot of hope is FCNL's role as a voice of a moral truth and integrity at a time in Washington when that is so deeply needed for Congress and for our country.
Thank you all.
Can I just add, Kristen, that I want to just underscore Friends Place because Bridget was actually clerk of the General Committee. She wasn't working at FCNL at the time, and I was the General Secretary, and we kind of together began those conversations with the folks that had been part of William Penn House, and that has a long and very deep, important history in Washington, D.C. that many friends have supported and participated in. And so the legacy that, we're able to sustain through that work that's going on there right now, I think is really important to what Bridget just named as that voice of integrity that people do rely on. And I think it's just a great opportunity to continue to see how that thrives and has an impact in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go to Stephen right now, my colleague who's there in the office, because we actually had quite a few questions come in through the registration link. So Stephen's going to ask a couple of those for us.
Yes, I'll lead with one that is a very good question to end on if we're running out of time. It's from Judith Burris. What is the most effective action citizens can take and others who are involved with FCNL to support FCNL and Quaker concerns?
Well, Stephen, if you're asking the question, okay, go ahead, Bridget, you should go.
I'll jump in, and I'm going to give 2. One is lobby Congress, build that relationship with your member of Congress. We're always going to say that. And the second is you have an opportunity right now to support the next 80 years of FCNL. We are, as Diane mentioned, coming to the end of our fiscal year. We have a very exciting match gift challenge. It's the largest matching gift challenge that FCNL's ever had, thanks to a group of very generous donors. So now, between now and June 30th, so you've got 9 days by my count, your gift is doubled. So every gift to FCNL is doubled to reach that $200,994 matching gift challenge. It's a really wonderful opportunity. It's a really important time for FCNL and for sustaining and supporting our work. And we're so grateful for all the support. And my understanding, Stephen, is that we are halfway there. So we have a great opportunity to get that second half to reach the goal, right?
57% of the way there.
That's great news. Diane?
I just share a quick story. So FCNL's fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th, which is why this press is on right now, is to meet a goal by the end of the fiscal year. So June 30th happens to be my birthday. When I was at the first or second year I was there, we were trying to meet the goal on my birthday. The development staff and the whole team came, the whole FCNL team came and presented me with one of those great big giant checks that showed that we'd met the goal. So even though it's not Bridget's birthday, I hope that on June 30th, Stephen, who I forgot to name, is also a former program assistant, will carry a great big check into Bridget's office and present it, and we'll have a photo of that. So it is, I know that, it's really the relationships with Congress, I think, are the most important thing and the most important way that people individually can have efficacy with Congress and self-efficacy. There's a sense of agency in being able to do that, but it is true that the financial support is really important. And I think the thing that's so wonderful is that the people who've been part of FCNL's community do understand that and really have been quite generous over the years. So gratitude.
Kristen, I want to add one other thing that a lot of people may be familiar with this story, that a church person came to a friend's meeting just to see what it was like, and it was an unprogrammed friends meeting, and sat down and waited and waited and waited and waited, and finally leaned over and said to a Quaker sitting next to them on a bench, "When does the service begin?" And that friend said, "At the rise of meeting, when meeting is ended." And one of the most important things people can do is practice their testimony, practice their religion, not under the roof of the church, not under the roof of the meeting house, but out in the world. And depending on who you are and where you are, that could mean you could help FCNL most by working with local immigrant group or local group working on economic justice, or lobbying your member of Congress. There's so many options, but the important thing, I think, is to get out from under the roof of the church and go out into the world and be a testifier.
That's great, Joe. What a great note to wrap up on. Just want to thank everybody on this call for joining us. This is a big milestone for FCNL. And so we're just so pleased to be able to share this with you. I know we didn't get to all the questions. There were quite a few, but we'll try to figure out how to address some of those maybe in follow up. But just to let you know, our full length version of the video clips that you saw should be available. We're hoping for August. So we'll keep all of you updated on that. And I think that's it for today.
Will this be recorded and be available too?
Yes, this has been recorded, so we will also share this in the follow-up. Great. Thank you all so much.